The day started like any other at Westfield Mall. Families rushed in and out of stores, children clung to ice cream cones, and shopkeepers arranged their displays with practiced precision. In the middle of all this noise and bustle, a 67-year-old woman named Dorothy Williams slowly walked through the entrance doors. Dorothy was dressed neatly, her hair pulled back in a bun streaked with silver, and she carried with her a small leather purse that had seen better days. She wasn't there to shop for luxury items or to pass the time. She was there because she had a purpose. For most people, malls are simply places to buy clothes, gifts, or food. But for Dorothy, Westfield Mall was a place where she could escape the loneliness that had crept into her life. A widow for nearly a decade, she lived alone in a small apartment 2 miles away. Her children were grown, busy with their own lives, and visits from them were rare. The mall gave her a sense of life, a reminder that the world was still spinning even if she sometimes felt left behind. As she strolled through the mall, she smiled warmly at strangers who brushed past her. Some smiled back politely, others ignored her altogether. Dorothy didn't mind. She had grown used to being invisible. But today, something felt different. Near the center court, a group of teenagers leaned against the railing, laughing loudly, their voices carrying across the polished tile floors. Dorothy noticed them staring at her. She lowered her eyes and tried to walk past quietly, but their laughter grew sharper, directed at her. "Hey, Grandma, lose your way to the nursing home?" one of them sneered. The others chuckled, emboldened by the cruelty. Dorothy paused, her hands tightening around the strap of her purse. She didn't want to cause a scene, but the sting of their words pierced her heart. She tried to ignore them and kept walking, but one of the boys stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "You shopping for diapers?" he mocked, smirking as his friends roared with laughter. Dorothy's face flushed red. She wasn't one for confrontation. Years of living quietly had taught her to endure, to swallow the bitterness of other people's unkindness. But today, something deep inside her whispered that enough was enough. She lifted her gaze and looked the boy straight in the eye. "Young man," she said softly but firmly, "one day you'll be old too. And when that day comes, I hope the world shows you more kindness than you are showing me." The boy froze, his smirk faltering. His friends went quiet for a moment before one of them tried to laugh it off. But Dorothy's words hung heavy in the air. For the first time, the teens seemed unsure. Dorothy turned and walked away, her step slow but steady. She didn't realize that her small act of courage had been witnessed by others. A security guard standing nearby had seen the exchange. A young woman pushing a stroller had heard Dorothy's words and felt tears sting her eyes. Dorothy had no idea, but that single moment was about to ripple further than she could ever imagine. Dorothy continued walking through the mall, her heart still pounding from the confrontation. She was proud of herself, though her voice had trembled. In a lifetime of choosing silence, speaking up had felt like a rebellion, a reminder that her voice still mattered. She found a quiet bench near the indoor fountain and sat down. The sound of water splashing against the marble soothed her nerves. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small paperback novel, the corners worn from use. Reading was her favorite way to disappear into another world. But before she could settle in, she noticed the same group of teenagers lingering nearby. They weren't laughing now. Instead, they were watching her, whispering among themselves. Dorothy's stomach tightened. She thought they might come back to harass her again. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the boys, the one who had mocked her the loudest, slowly walked toward her. His hands were shoved in his hoodie pocket, and his shoulders slumped. Dorothy's instinct was to brace herself, but when he stopped in front of her, his expression wasn't mocking. It was apologetic. "Ma'am," he began awkwardly, avoiding her gaze. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said those things." Dorothy blinked, surprised. She studied his face, and beneath the bravado, she saw it. The insecurity of a teenager trying too hard to impress his friends.
She softened.
"Thank you," she said gently. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong." The boy nodded quickly, then walked back to his friends. Dorothy thought that was the end of it. But as she watched, the boy turned around and grabbed his friends by the sleeves. He whispered something to them, and after a pause, the entire group shuffled toward her. One by one, each of them muttered apologies. Some were sincere, others mumbled, but Dorothy didn't care. What mattered was that they were trying. "You remind me of my grandma," one of the girls admitted shyly. "She passed away last year. I guess I miss her." Dorothy's chest tightened. For a moment, she saw herself not as a target of ridicule, but as a reminder of the love someone had lost. She reached out and gently squeezed the girl's hand. "I'm sure she was proud of you," Dorothy whispered. The group lingered for a few moments longer before walking away, quieter than before. Dorothy leaned back against a bench, shaken by how quickly things had turned. She hadn't expected her words to change anything, but somehow they had. As she sat there, a man in his 40s approached her. He was tall, dressed in a neat polo shirt and jeans, with a security badge clipped to his belt. Dorothy recognized him as the guard who had been watching earlier. "Ma'am," he said with a respectful nod, "I saw what happened. I just want you to know, you handled that better than most people could. You stood your ground, and you did it with dignity." Dorothy smiled faintly. "I wasn't sure I could." The guard's eyes softened. "Sometimes, all it takes is one voice to remind people to be better. Today, that voice was yours." Dorothy glanced around the busy mall, her heart warming. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. And she had no idea that her story at Westfield Mall was only beginning. The mall seemed brighter to Dorothy now, though nothing about the fluorescent lights had changed. It was something inside her, a spark she hadn't felt in years. But peace never lasts long in a crowded place like Westfield Mall. As Dorothy tucked her book back into her purse and prepared to leave, a sudden commotion erupted near the food court. Shouts rang out, and the sound of a tray clattering to the floor echoed across the tiled floor. People turned their heads. Some froze. Others rushed away in panic. Dorothy stood up, leaning on her cane, trying to see over the crowd. At the center of it all, two young men were shoving each other aggressively. One had grabbed the other by the shirt, and their voices grew louder, angrier. The mall security guard who had spoken to Dorothy earlier sprinted toward the fight. His name tag read Michael. "Break it up," Michael shouted, stepping between them. But the fight didn't stop. Instead, one of the men shoved Michael hard, nearly knocking him to the ground. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone pulled out their phone and began recording. Dorothy's pulse quickened. For a moment, she considered walking away. It wasn't her battle. But then, she remembered the teenagers, how her single voice had shifted the entire tone of the moment. She couldn't just stand by. Not now. With trembling determination, Dorothy walked forward. Her cane clicked against the floor, her steps slow but steady. People parted for her, confused by the sight of a small, elderly woman heading straight into chaos. "Stop this nonsense," she shouted, her voice carrying farther than she expected. The two men froze, startled. Even Michael turned, surprised by the authority in her tone. Dorothy planted herself between the fighters, her eyes sharp as steel. "You should be ashamed of yourselves," she continued, pointing her cane at them. "Look around you. Children are watching. Families are frightened. Is this how you want to be remembered? As men who can't control their tempers?" For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. The men exchanged a glance, their fury dampened by her words. One muttered something under his breath and backed away. The other dropped his fists, his breathing heavy but his stance softening. Michael stepped in quickly, separating them further and guiding them toward the security office. Before leaving, he gave Dorothy a look that was equal parts relief and admiration. The crowd broke into whispers. Some clapped softly, others simply stared. A few even approached Dorothy, thanking her for her bravery. "I just spoke up," Dorothy said humbly, shaking her head. "That's all." But it wasn't just words. It was her presence, her fearlessness in a moment where everyone else had chosen silence. Later, as Dorothy sat again near the fountain, a young mother approached her. She held her daughter by the hand, a little girl no older than 7, with wide eyes that hadn't left Dorothy since the incident. "My daughter wants to say something to you," the woman said softly. The girl stepped forward, her tiny voice trembling. You're a hero. Dorothy's eyes welled with tears. She knelt down slowly, ignoring the protest of her knees, and placed a gentle hand on the girl's cheek. No, sweetheart, she whispered. I'm just someone who remembered that being brave doesn't depend on age. The girl hugged her tightly, and for Dorothy, the embrace felt like a gift she didn't know she needed. Little did she realize, her story was no longer just a passing moment in the mall. The video someone had recorded was already spreading across social media, carrying her courage far beyond Westfield's walls. By the time Dorothy returned home that evening, her legs were sore and her heart full. She set her purse down, fed her cat, and lowered herself carefully into her favorite recliner. To her, the day was already remarkable enough, helping stop a fight, comforting a little girl, and feeling alive in ways she hadn't for years. She had no idea that her story was just beginning. Across the city, a teenager uploaded the video of Dorothy standing between two angry men at Westfield Mall. The clip was less than 2 minutes long, shaky in places, but it captured everything. Her steady voice, her sharp words, and the stunned silence that followed. The caption read simply, "This grandma is braver than all of us." Within hours, the video spread like wildfire. On TikTok, people stitched the clip with captions like "Goals" and "Be like Dorothy." On Twitter, it was retweeted thousands of times, each share adding new waves of comments. Some called her a hero. Others compared her to famous activists, saying she reminded them of the strength and wisdom the world often overlooked. By midnight, Dorothy Williams, a 67-year-old widow who had once lived quietly and unnoticed, was trending worldwide. The next morning, her phone rang nonstop. At first, it was just neighbors and friends who had seen her on Facebook. Then came reporters, TV hosts, even podcast producers, all begging for interviews. Dorothy stared at the blinking red light of her answering machine in disbelief. "Dorothy," her neighbor Martha said when she dropped by with a newspaper, "you're on the front page. Look, courage at the mall. Local woman stops fight. That's you." Dorothy laughed nervously, shaking her head. "Oh, heavens. I didn't do anything special. I just spoke up." But the world disagreed. By the end of the week, she had been invited onto a national morning show. Sitting under the bright studio lights, wearing her best blue sweater, Dorothy told her story simply, how she had seen people scared, how she couldn't walk away, how she believed that kindness and courage weren't bound by age. Millions of viewers tuned in. Many cried. Some said she reminded them of their grandmothers. Others admitted they had walked past situations like that without speaking up and promised themselves they'd act differently next time. Dorothy returned home overwhelmed, clutching a bouquet of flowers from the producers. She thought the attention would fade quickly, but it didn't. Instead, her mailbox filled with letters from strangers. One was from a teacher in another state. "I showed your video to my students. They all said they want to be brave like you." Another was from a young man. "I've been angry at the world lately, ready to fight anyone who looked at me wrong. Then I saw you, standing firm and calm. You made me rethink everything." Dorothy read each message slowly, tears often blurring the words. She had lived most of her life believing her best years were behind her. Now, at 67, she was inspiring people she'd never met, in places she'd never been. And deep inside, a question stirred. A question she hadn't dared ask in years. What if this was only the beginning? In the weeks that followed, Dorothy's life transformed in ways she never imagined. The quiet, widowed woman who once shuffled through the mall unnoticed was now a figure of inspiration. Invitations poured in from schools, community centers, and even international conferences. Everyone wanted Dorothy to speak about courage, compassion, and the power of standing up in difficult moments. At first, Dorothy hesitated. She was not a public speaker, nor had she ever thought of herself as one. She had spent most of her life raising a family, working ordinary jobs, and mourning the quiet loss of her husband years earlier. What could she possibly teach the world? But then she remembered the faces of those children at Westfield Mall. She remembered the little girl who had clung to her grandmother's hand, whispering, "She's like a superhero." That memory gave her strength.
So she said yes.
Her first real speaking event took place at the very same mall where it had all begun. Chairs were set up in the food court, and hundreds of people came, not just to shop, but to hear Dorothy Williams share her story. As she stood at the small podium, microphone trembling slightly in her hand, she began, "I am not special. I am not famous. I am just a woman who couldn't look away. That's all." The crowd leaned in. Dorothy went on to describe the moment, the fear in the shopper's eyes, the way her own knees had shaken, and the choice she had made to step forward instead of back. She ended with words that would echo long after the event. Courage is not about being fearless. Courage is about being afraid and choosing to act anyway. The applause was thunderous. From there, Dorothy's journey expanded. She traveled to high schools, where teenagers cheered her like a rock star. She spoke at universities, where professors praised her as a living example of moral courage. A nonprofit even offered her a position as an ambassador for community safety, ensuring her message reached neighborhoods everywhere. But perhaps the most touching moment came months later, when she was invited to a women's shelter. There, she sat in a circle with survivors who had endured unimaginable hardships. They told her that seeing her video gave them hope, that if a grandmother could stand tall in the face of conflict, so could they. Dorothy wept that day, realizing the true depth of her impact. Despite her newfound recognition, Dorothy remained humble. She still walked to the corner store, still fed her cat every evening, still sat in her recliner with a cup of tea. Fame never changed her spirit. It only amplified what had always been inside, a steady, unwavering belief that kindness could shift the world. One crisp autumn morning, as Dorothy walked through Westfield Mall again, people greeted her with smiles, waves, even hugs. The place that had once been just a shopping center was now a symbol of her courage. And as she paused by the entrance doors, she thought back to that first day. She had walked in as an ordinary woman. She had left as someone different, not because she wanted attention, but because she had chosen to act when it mattered most. Her life was proof of something timeless. You are never too old to be brave. You are never too small to make a difference. And sometimes, one ordinary voice is enough to silence the chaos of the world. Dorothy Williams, at 67 years old, had become the grandmother of courage, a reminder that true heroes don't always wear uniforms or capes. Sometimes, they walk quietly among us, carrying nothing but wisdom, love, and the willingness to stand tall when others cannot. And so, the woman who once thought her best years were behind her discovered the truth. Her story was not ending. It was only just beginning.